All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for this webinar hosted by Libraries for Digital Equity and featuring Mission Telecom. We're really excited for this event that we've got planned today. Just want to give you a quick intro in case you're not familiar with Libraries for Digital Equity. Our mission is to provide resources and training and news and current events, any information you might need to libraries and to libraries partners who are working to close the digital divide. So everything that you'll find on our website, libraries4de.org, is all going to be free and available. Feel free to share it with your library staff, your partners. We just want to give you all the tools that you need to succeed. Today, we have planned for you 30 minutes of content, and then we've got 15 minutes of Q&A. So stick around for that first half hour of great content. We've got Mark Caldwell here, the Director of Broadband Operations with Mission Telecom, and I am Liz Gabbitas. I'm the Founder and Managing Director of Libraries for Digital Equity, and we're excited to be talking with you today. We'll have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end here, and let's see. Oh, and we've got a raffle. This is exciting. A little teaser here. So Mission Telecom is raffling off for our grand prize a hotspot and a year of service. So you're going to want to stick around to see if you can get that for your library. We've also got a Libraries for DE swag bag we'll be raffling at the end. I want to encourage you to use the chat all throughout this training today. You're welcome to participate, engage with other attendees, send us questions in the chat as we go. And then once we hit the Q&A at the end, you're welcome to come off of mute and to ask your questions out loud. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, we will be sharing the slides. There's going to be some great info on here, so we'll make sure that you get a copy of the slides, and we'll also make sure that you get a copy of the recording in case you would like to refer back to this later. So I think that's what we've got for our agenda. That's what on our lineup today. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Mark Caldwell. I'm the Director of Broadband Operations at Mission Telecom. I've spent a lot of time in the digital equity space. I started my career on Capitol Hill, spent 8 years doing work in the House and the Senate. I was at the Colorado Broadband Office right before this, and I'm really excited to share some of the tools we use when we talk to libraries, schools, and other nonprofits. I think you'll find it useful. So thanks for the opportunity to present with you, Liz, and I look forward to getting this started.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here and to have Mission Telecom here. They are a great partner for libraries. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our agenda. I'm going to kick this off here talking about the digital divide. So I know if you are here in this webinar, you probably have a good understanding already of the digital divide and of what libraries are doing. We'll just do a quick refresher for anyone if this is new or if you're going for the first time, hotspot program, maybe this is something I should look at. So when we talk about the digital divide, what we're saying is that there's three pillars or three pieces of access that everybody needs to be able to fully participate in the modern world. And that is access to the internet, that's the basic connectivity, devices that can use that internet connection, and then the digital skills to actually be able to use those devices safely and productively and effectively. And so those three pieces might seem really simple, really straightforward, or you might say, oh, actually, yeah, I know that there's no connectivity in my neighborhood. You know, there's no fiber running down my street. Or you might say, oh, yeah, that's right. My laptop actually isn't connecting to Wi-Fi anymore. I guess it's just too old. And so depending on, your personal experience, you might have seen one of these pillars more or less as a barrier. We're going to talk about the ways that libraries are already answering all three of these pillars. Mark, do you want to go to the next slide? So we know that the divide for connectivity is pretty severe. We know that there's, especially among our low-income households that we're serving, that a lot of folks actually don't have that connectivity that maybe we take for granted, especially if we're sitting here on a virtual training. Maybe we're taking this for granted. And, there's different levels of connectivity. Maybe folks have a really great fiber connection, or maybe they are totally reliant on their cell phone at home. That's what we're looking at when we see that 43% of low-income households without home broadband subscriptions. That means that, maybe they've got a cell phone at home, but that's it. And that's not a connection that you can, work from home or help your kids do their schoolwork or take your, telehealth appointments on. So this is something that libraries can be solving with hotspots, with, loaning programs. Let's go, Mark, to the next slide. So again, we're looking at this disproportionate impact to low-income households. You can see in this chart here, I think it's so interesting how that divide is widening. whether or not folks can afford their home internet, especially as we're seeing these prices, rise, the subscription packages that are offered, those costs are rising. I think that divide is going to keep widening. So it's something we need to be aware of. Okay, as far as libraries and how we're closing the digital divide, I know we've got mostly librarians on this call, but I did see some folks that are not in libraries, which is very exciting. So let's just do a quick little review here. Actually, about half of libraries in the US offer Wi-Fi hotspot checkout programs, which is fantastic. That statistic was much, much lower 5 years ago, and I think this is really exciting. But as much as that is growing, so we've got this 15% increase in library hotspot programs just since the beginning of the pandemic for the first 3 years, where we were kind of learning to deal with this increasingly virtual world. As much as these programs are growing, these costs can be really high. The question of, well, how should I be providing service? Part of my population is super rural and, my hotspots aren't actually serving them. Do I need to subscribe to this other? Anyway, there's questions that keep emerging. These costs keep piling up. I know that this is a difficult question, and more libraries are having to say, actually, we just don't have the budget for this anymore. Maybe our COVID funding ended, and this isn't something we can do. One of my favorite statistics is this last one here, that if you look at the average turnover rate of your materials in your library's collection, that circulation rate, turnover rate, is 10 times higher for hotspots than for the average library material. Any item sitting in that library, your hotspots are being used 10 times more. I think that really shows us how important these programs are.
Thanks for the setup, Liz. Some really amazing stats. I learned something putting these together for the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mission Telecom, what we do, and then we're going to get into some of the tools that we help with our partners to explain and utilize. So Mission Telecom is a 501c4 nonprofit wireless broadband provider and grant-making foundation. We actually control spectrum licenses. We lease them to a commercial partner. It's a subsidiary of T-Mobile, and in exchange, we get cash royalties and access to the T-Mobile network that we then resell to schools, libraries, and nonprofits at really affordable rates. So I run the broadband program on the side. We have another team, Mission Telecom Giving, that handles the social impact and philanthropy program. As I mentioned, we are focused exclusively on education institutions, libraries, nonprofits, and social welfare groups. We don't sell directly to individual households. Some of our nonprofit partners do. For instance, we work with a lot of digital equity computer refurbishers who then give computers away and teach classes. And those folks can resell service to the participants of their program. We don't work with businesses today either. We do have some that are referral partners. So when we go to, for instance, an education or a library conference, some folks say, hey, how can I get this in front of my folks that I serve at libraries? And I did want to mention some of the products we sell. So we offer mobile hotspots, connected laptops and tablets. Fixed wireless home internet is our top selling product. These would be a router that plugs into the wall. It connects to the cell phone tower, but provides Wi-Fi in the location. We can do bookmobiles, activity vans, school buses. And finally, we do have BYOD. So for folks out there who maybe had a program during COVID, they've got devices already, we can actually send a SIM card with our plan active on it, and you can put it in the back of the hotspot and continue service. I did want to mention that we are rolling out a $99.99 1 year of service. We're recognizing that with E-rate funding in jeopardy, with other federal funds in jeopardy from IMLS, from the Department of Education being eliminated, there is a need for affordable service. So we're trying to meet the moment with under $100 plan for a full year. If you'd like to learn more about that, Dana, who works on our marketing team, she's going to paste a link to a calendar. Grab an appointment or visit our website. So that's the background on Mission Telecom. If you've got questions, happy to answer them in the Q&A. But I'm going to turn it over to the reason we're all here, which is the tools to help you manage your Wi-Fi hotspot program. So first of all, I want to start with just a basic primer on wireless networks. In the picture, you see a cell phone tower, right? And I'm going to explain what those different radios are and how they work. But I think the general idea here is that Wireless networks use radio frequencies. So as I mentioned, Mission Telecom, we lease our radio frequencies. Cell phone companies put up radios that transmit on different frequencies, but not all the frequencies are created the same. So the lower frequencies, so for example, this big long radio right here, this is a low band frequency, something in the 600 to 800 megahertz range. It's going to travel really, really long distances, but it typically has less capacity because the way in which we allocated frequencies for cell phones back in the early 80s and 90s, we assumed everyone was going to be talking or listening on a phone, and that's not how we use our phones today. Most people are downloading a lot more content than they're uploading. But because we allocated it in a certain way, we have a limited number of frequencies we can use to transmit data. And so lower frequencies are really great for coverage, but they typically have less capacity on them. This particular picture, there's actually multiple cell phone companies. So typically what happens is, maybe Verizon rents out the top layer, and then maybe T-Mobile gets the next layer. Sometimes you'll see a third or a fourth carrier on there. Now, the higher frequencies, those typically travel shorter distances, but because of advancements in technology and the way we've allocated them, there's larger slices of spectrum, which means they have higher capacity. So an example would be this little square radio right here is likely a mid-band radio, somewhere in the 2.5 to perhaps 3.9 gigahertz range. And so it's a little more compact radio. It has more frequencies to work with, has more capacity, but it's limited in range. So another way to think about it is if you heard a marching band coming down the road, you're going to hear the bass drum a lot faster than you're going to hear the piccolo, right? Because the frequency is lower and it travels further. Here's an example of T-Mobile's network in particular and the different frequencies they use. And this particular layer cake gives you a sense of the range of the frequency, and the thickness talks about the capacity. So the low band, that big long radio I just showed you, it travels 2 to 5 miles. If you'll notice how thick it is, it's not very thick. So the capacity is somewhat limited, but this is really what folks use in rural areas to cover. They can use less towers, so they have to pay less lease payments to a company, and they can get more coverage out of the same radio. The millimeter wave is the opposite end of the spectrum. So these are frequencies that are very high up, 24 gigahertz, 28 gigahertz, 37 gigahertz. They have a range of about 1,500 feet, so not very far. There's this fantastic video from a few years ago of someone on a cell phone with a sliding glass door, and he closes the door and the frequency stops. These particular frequencies do not go through walls. They don't go through glass. They're really good for things like stadiums, concert venues, airports. They can handle a lot of capacity, but you have to have a lot of different radios to handle it. So the Goldilocks spectrum or frequency is really the mid-band. So you'll notice it's got a pretty thick layer, a lot of capacity. It has a reasonably good range, right? This one travels 1 to 2 miles. I've seen networks that can get even for a longer range than that in the 4 or 5. There's a network in Michigan that 10 miles of range out of this particular frequency. So that's sort of the differences. And now we're going to learn, how do we figure out in my neighborhood or my community where the particular radios or frequencies are at. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between 4G and 5G. So as I mentioned, when we first started allocating spectrum in the US, we typically did a little slice for uplink and a little slice for downlink. And then as we advanced in technology, 4G adopted those little slivers of spectrum. So the difference really between 4G and 5G is the amount of frequencies that we have to use. 4G is like you have one octave. You can play those notes at different times. That's called time division duplexing, if you're a telecom nerd like me. And you can play different frequencies, like the low C and the high C are different frequencies, and the radio can hear those different. But you only have so many notes to play, right? So when you put a lot of users on there, there's a limitation in terms of capacity. The difference with 5G is you've got the whole piano. You have all the different notes and all the different time slots to play. So you can put a lot more simultaneous conversations on the network. I like to use the frequency analogy because we're literally talking frequencies, right? All right. And then one final slide before we jump into the tool we wanted to share. This is an example. Now, 5G has been rolled out in different frequencies as well. So this is an example of T-Mobile's 5G at the low band and the mid band and the difference in the capacity. Now, this is a little bit old data, 2021, but I thought it was illustrative of that thick slice of spectrum at the higher frequency has almost 10 times more capacity than that thin slice of spectrum at the lower frequency. So there's a big difference in whether you've got an ultra capacity, as T-Mobile calls it, that in a Verizon lingo, it's ultra wideband. There's a difference between the capacity, and it's pretty dramatic. You're going to notice this if you put a lot of users. Now, I will say the average stream, like if you were streaming a Netflix video, it's about 5 megabits. So it's not a huge amount of data, but you can imagine a family of four using multiple devices, a Ring doorbell, a TV, you're going to see some constraints on just that thinner slice of spectrum. All right, and then onto our tool. The tool that we want to show you today is called coveragemap.com. It's a website created by a guy. I live in near Boulder, Colorado. He lives in Longmont, about 15 minutes up the road. And he runs this big YouTube channel. His name is Stetson Doggett. He reviews all kinds of MVNO cell phone plans. And so he has a whole business around, what's the best plan? How much data do you get? But he started noticing this problem around crowdsourced speed test data and coverage. And so he built this tool. It has a couple different maps. The first map I'm going to show you has to deal with signal strength. This is actually how we learn where is the infrastructure. The signal strength tells us how close we are to the tower, and the data is actually provided by the carriers to the FCC every 6 months. So he's taking publicly available data and making a map out of it for every carrier. So whether you're on T-Mobile, he even has Boost, he has the regional carriers in there. So this might be actually useful for you in your personal life, but it's definitely useful in terms of a hotspot program and understanding, does the service you have cover the parts of the community that you want to cover? So signal strength gives us a really clear picture of where the infrastructure is. The problem is you might be on 5G, but you're on that low band slice and not the mid band slice. So we try to use what's the speed test map that he's created to understand, am I on that ultra capacity thick layer or am I on that low band low layer? So we're going to dive into the map. What I want someone to do is to type me an address that I can use to put into the map as I pull it up. Don't be
Let's get
bashful.
a volunteer. Yeah, who wants
Someone's
to
got a
see
good location.
their library? Maybe pick a library branch that's like way out there.
All right,
Okay.
Aaron's stepping up. Let's see what this Phoenix address does.
Oh, you said type, and I was going to share.
I'll try a couple of these just to show you. All right. So Aaron's got an address here in Phoenix. Interestingly enough, Mission Telecom has a license in Phoenix that we lease to T-Mobile. So this is on our spectrum. Our tower used to be in Tempe, at the big telecom mountain in Tempe. All right, so what we're looking at here, I'm going to start with our signal strength map. This is a map, again, that the carrier gives to the FCC. So typically it's pretty accurate, but it's about every 6 months. So this shows the infrastructure in the greater Phoenix area. Not surprisingly, you see a lot of infrastructure in downtown, in Scottsdale, which is a pretty ritzy neighborhood. And as you get to the more rural areas, you see gaps. This means they are not reporting any coverage in that particular location. And then even the lighter colors, let me pull the legend up for you. This shows you the dBm. So again, the darkest color is going to be pretty close to where that tower is. So if I zoom in on, this is a good example here. The tower is probably sitting on a building somewhere in this area, for example. Now, I want to make sure I get to Erin's address. She's picked one that's got, looks like there might be an infrastructure there or over here, but it doesn't show up as very strong signal at that particular library branch. Now I'm on LTE. Now, if I change it to 5G, I'm going to see different layout. T-Mobile's got the biggest, fastest 5G, so you see a little better coverage. What I can also do on this map is I can pick any other carrier. So AT&T at that location, not so great. On their 5G, a little better on their 4G. So depending on if you've got a 4G hotspot or a 5G hotspot, you might want to check that out. Verizon has a very good LTE network. It was the best for years. Not as good of a 5G network. So you'll see a little bit differences. That's pretty good actually for Verizon at that particular location. And then Boost is a new entrant to the market. I'm kind of curious. They do have some infrastructure. They've been under the FCC mandate to build out, but we can check. They don't have a 4G network. They've launched only on 5G. But this tool, you can again pick any of these regional carriers. You can pick any of these other carriers and you can get a sense of what data are they giving the FCC in terms of coverage. But what we want to know is outside of coverage, how does the service actually perform at that location? So the other map that I want to show you is the speed test map. So these are real speed tests. There's an app, coveragemap.com app. I have populated several of these squares myself. And you can actually add to the map if you want to. But that particular location has one test. If I click on it, 10 over 0.1, not the greatest test, but you'll notice only one test in that location. So what I would tell you is that maybe it was in the basement of a building. Maybe there's metal roof. There's a lot of factors that could influence it. Now, just up the road from that library, there was another test, 400 megabits a second, just down the road, right? And you'll notice if I go back to my signal strength map, there's an infrastructure there, right? There's a radio tower somewhere on the Safeway building or at the park there. So that gives you a sense of where that signal is the strongest. You know, if you go to downtown on T-Mobile in particular, is a really dark one, you're going to see gigabit plus speeds in a lot of locations. Let's try one more just as an example. Diana, I like trying a rural one just to give people an example here. So Diane is a good friend here, and she works in Pottsboro. So here's what we see in this particular location on the lake here in Pottsboro or close to Cambridge. No one has done a speed test at that particular location, so we don't have a verification of whether or not the service works, but we would have the signal strength map. And you'll see that there is infrastructure here and here. Interestingly enough, that one little block doesn't have it, but you can kind of get a sense. And again, I'll zoom out a little bit to give you, this is T-Mobile's 5G network. This is, AT&T's network in the same area. This is Verizon's network in the same area. So it's always good to just kind of compare. I think one of the lessons here is that as a hotspot program at a library, you might want to consider having hotspots from multiple carriers and trying to ask, where is this device going to be used? Because it's going to vary dramatically based on the infrastructure build. But that's the rural location for Pottsboro. Don't have a speed test at that one. But if you want to test it out, Diane, I'll see how to download the app. Let's try one more here. Let's try North Carolina. Pretty rural North Carolina again. There is coverage on the T-Mobile network there. We can check the AT&T coverage, not very good. Now we also can do LTE, see if the LTE, it does have 4G coverage, not 5G. Verizon probably has 4G coverage. Ooh, it even has 5G coverage. So that gives you a comparison. T-Mobile, I didn't look, that's their LTE. So they do have LTE at that location. If you were, again, running a 4G hotspot, that would work. 5G, it has it as well. And then if I go to the speed test, I can see not right at that location, but that's the infrastructure somewhere in there. Someone ran a speed test. Let's see what it says. 500 megs, 592 megs. Pretty cool. And this is a good example where there's multiple tests at that particular spot. So you can see that, the slowest speed test at that location was 107 over 0.32. And the fastest test was 592. The map, I think I have my settings on fastest, but you could set it to other settings. It's on best download, but you could do average or median, or you could look at, upload speeds and so forth. So that's the tool in a nutshell. I'm going to paste the link. Maybe it's already in there, but I'm going to paste it for you all so you have it. I would encourage you to, download the app and test it out as you're driving. You'll notice there's a lot of these speed test guys who they'll drive on the highway and they'll do a test every 5 minutes. And so usually you see a lot of infrastructure along the highway corridors, and that'll give you a sense of, close to the tower, what are you going to get? But yeah, this is a tool we walk through with all of our partners. I just want to give you an example of, downtown dense urban areas. You do see a lot of these kind of gigabit level speeds, particularly on T-Mobile. This one's 1.6 gigs on a wireless network, folks. That's pretty amazing. All right. I'm going to go back to the slides now. Let's see, Jack's got a question. If we do speed tests through the app, will it contribute to the, yes, it will. So I'll actually do a fun one for you, which is my wife had a conference in Kauai this year. And so I was talking to a guy in Hawaii yesterday, but I was on a whale watching boat and I decided I would test my app. And so I stayed kind of over in this area and this is me on a boat on a hotspot, 500 megs a second off the coast. So it's kind of fun. I have an engineering degree. I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff. So you may not be as nerdy as me, but so that's the tool we really wanted to share. We find it really valuable when we talk to folks. I hope you get some use out of it. And then let's turn on to the next part of our program.
So we just wanted to highlight a few resources. If you're working on your hotspot program, you're trying to figure out whether you're launching it, whether you're just trying to, maybe go for a step up, whether you're just trying to keep it secure and running and stable with all these, funding questions going on right now. There's some resources on our website, librariesforde.org/resources. Poke around through there. You might find some helpful stuff. I wanted to highlight just a couple of them. We've got, well, I'll start on the right-hand side, actually. If you enjoyed listening to Mark and hearing all of this great information, and you also went, this is so intimidating. There's so much like technical language here. How am I gonna, how can I like consume all of this information? I hear you. I get it. It can be very intimidating talking to folks who are like way steeped in the technical world. So we've got broadband acronyms and jargon little handout, like desk guide for you. It's 2 pages, 1 page. I think it's 1 page. And it's just some of those terms that you're going to hear most frequently as, like weird words that don't make a lot of sense and that just get thrown out. Like, of course, everybody knows what this means. And so it's this just quick little guide to help you in those conversations. I'd encourage you to take a look at that one. We've got lots of, free trainings. You'll get the link to this video and you'll see we've got playlists of other, videos and trainings like this. And then we've also got a sample on the left-hand side here, a sample hotspot borrower agreement. So, maybe you're launching this for the first time and you've got a city manager saying, well, but this is way too much risk, but how can you possibly take on this kind of liability at the library? Well, here's a sample borrower agreement. Run this through your general counsel, take some of the language out of that. That might help you make the case for it. So poke around our website for resources like these ones and other ones. Hopefully you'll find some stuff there you need. If there's something that you need that's not there, I would encourage you to shoot us a message. We are looking for, what your needs are, and then we, try to find partners so that we can offer this information to you. Partners like Mark and like Mission Telecom here to make sure that you've got what you need. So we just wanted to highlight those resources for you. Mark, let's go on.
Awesome. We want to leave some time for Q&A. So we can do that now, and then stay tuned. We're going to talk about our next webinar and the raffle. Does anyone have questions? I see Sarah posted one and Matt gave her a response there. Did we get that answered, Sarah? I mean, I think that the general gist of it is this is a way you could potentially find out which carrier has the best infrastructure in the place that the hotspot would be used. And again, I think one recommendation would be consider using multiple carriers. We ride on the T-Mobile network. It works in a lot of places, but it doesn't work everywhere. We try to be upfront about that with people. So it might be worth having agreements with multiples. There's other factors too. It's not just the infrastructure. The rate plan has a lot to do with it. You might have a plan that has a data limit or a throttle or something like that. We have an unlimited plan, a truly unlimited plan. So we don't have issues with data throttling or that sort of thing. But other carriers, they might say, oh, I can do a $15 plan, but they have some, 480p video. It's lower in priority. It has a throttle, things like that.
That's a good question. I see another question here from Diane. Can you talk about best practices for the lengths of checkouts? Mark, I'll jump on this one. So what I've seen in hotspot programs that I've run and that I've worked with is that it's gonna depend on your target audience, your target patrons. If you're going for say, school kids, I've seen semester-long checkouts be really successful, especially, in a college town. If you've got folks where that they need to take it and go to school for 4 months during the semester and then come back and return it at their, hometown library, I've seen those long checkout periods be really successful. Um, I have also seen long checkout periods be an issue, especially if it's tied with a device and you're hoping that they'll come back together. And so I know that some libraries that have done things like, a 6 month or a year-long checkout period for a hotspot and a Chromebook at the same time, that it can be tough to get those back at the same time. So if what you're going for is like with that statistic we had earlier, that like high turnover and being able to just get the hotspots to people quickly, then I feel like I see the most success with a shorter checkout period, maybe 2 weeks. I know that there's a lot of variety in what folks do as far as renewals, whether they let patrons renew or they have to see it, or how long the wait list is. And I'm sure that you have policies that can help you figure out those questions. I would say like the first thing to just consider is what that audience is that you're aiming at, whether it's your general library users who are used to say a month-long checkout period. Then I would just try to keep it consistent. I really love the approach of looking at hotspots like just another piece of your circulating collection rather than this totally separate service. Michael says there are 4G and 5G embedded Chromebook options if you don't want to try and pair a Chromebook and hotspot together. Yeah, it's true. With LTE devices, I do actually see more success in longer checkout periods. So if you're doing, an iPad that automatically connects to the cellular network, or, a Chromebook, I do see success in having month, 2 month, maybe 6 month long checkout periods for those, because it is just one device that you're trying to get back. You've got less of that like fear factor of patrons going, well, I have one of these, but I don't know where the other one is, and I know that they're due back. Um, yeah, yeah.
And I think the pro and con on that is, if the hotspot's being used by one user, a computer or a tablet is great. If it's, multiple people in a family, it might make more sense to check out a hotspot and the device separately. But it is a lot easier from a return standpoint to get your equipment back.
And I've also heard about some cool programs that libraries are doing with checking out routers, checking out equipment for families to get one device that's then going to use a cell network and set up something more robust for their home so that everyone is able to use that network. Kids that are going to school, adults that are, working or doing telehealth or whatever it is. I think that's a really cool program. And, with something like that, when it becomes kind of part of your home life, I think that longer checkout period is probably necessary. Yeah, and Aaron points out hold comes in for one but not the other when you're tying devices together. That makes it really tough too.
Other questions?
And we will invite you if anyone would like to unmute and share out loud.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jack Campbell, and I'm coming from Community Health Network of Washington here in Washington State. I just had a question on, is there a specific manufacturer of these hotspot devices that you've noticed to be more reliable, or is it just kind of based on what each carrier has available?
That's a good question. There's a lot of different hotspot models out there. Here's what I would tell you. The 4G hotspots at this point, because LTE's been around for 15, 20 years, have come down in price pretty dramatically. But that chipset, there's been millions, maybe billions of them made. So our like 4G hotspot, a common one with T-Mobile is called a Franklin T10. And they're pretty affordable. They're in the $50 to $60 range in terms of price. In terms of capacity, you might see something like 20 to 50 megabits per second. It's probably pretty reasonable for a school kid, a couple people to be on there. On the higher end, the more extreme end, the other kind of flagship product, particularly in the T-Mobile world, is called an Inseego MiFi X Pro. The price difference is quite dramatic. Those things cost, we sell them for $292. But they have a more advanced chipset. They have a lot more technology that can communicate with the cell phone tower. I took one recently to an education conference in Seattle, and I was able to get 400 or 500 megabits per second at my little booth. And sometimes the hotel Wi-Fi isn't working very well, so I had a lot of people that were asking to borrow the password for the Wi-Fi hotspot. But that's what you typically see on the higher end, is you can get some more advanced devices. Maybe they use multiple frequencies. They have more MIMO. MIMO is multiple input, multiple output, pretty nerdy term, but basically more antennas that can talk to the tower. And those typically see much higher speeds, 100 plus pretty easily. I've gotten 700 megs on that particular device. And then there's stuff in between. I think the question is like this particular Inseego device, you can put 32 users on it. It's a, like I said, almost a $300 hotspot for a library. Is that too risky to check out a $300 hotspot? Maybe, maybe not. There might be other options in the middle that do enough users, have really pretty good speeds, but they're on 5G. As you saw on the map, I think I would encourage you all to think about adding 5G just because it's just a better experience, but it does come with a higher cost and a little more risk.
Thank you for the very comprehensive answer. I appreciate it. And what I was thinking was having like a mixture of devices. We work with another organization that refurbishes laptop computers, and they reserve, the more, I don't know, the more powerful computers for students, artists, engineers, those kinds of people. And then they reserve, netbooks, revive those for, somebody that's really only using it to check emails. So kind of using that mentality with the hotspots might be effective for something
Yeah.
that we're thinking about. So yeah, thank you for that. That was great.
And just one more add on the Franklin T10. Franklin's a pretty popular manufacturer. There's several others, as I mentioned, but they have a 5G device called a Jetstream RG 2100. So little, it sounds like a Star Wars robot, but it's $183. It's on the 5G network and it gets really good speeds and it costs $183. So that, for example, that's about $100, $110 difference between the highest end product and sort of the middle range product, but it gets you on the 5G.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much for those recommendations. I'll definitely do some research on those.
Thanks for the question, Jack.
There was a
Other
question.
questions?
There's a question in the chat, which has gotten a little bit of an answer already. How do you handle cases where hotspots are not being returned to the borrowers? And I just want to add to what was already said. That is something that you should look for in your provider when you're picking, where to get your hotspot service. Is make sure that they can be responsive to those requests when you need to, shut off that service quickly, and also when you want to turn back on that service quickly. Because once it gets checked back in, if you've got a hold list, you want to get back out as soon as possible. You don't want to have to wait, 3 business days or whatever for that to come back on. I know that there's library folks on here that have been doing hotspot checkout for years. So I just want to invite if anyone here has recommendations as far as that, I would love to hear from other library folks, either in the chat or if you want to unmute.
Well, I'll add one thing to what Liz said as folks get brave. The carrier should be able to suspend the service either through if you log in and suspend it yourself or talk. In our case, we offer the ability to do that for you, but sometimes that can trigger someone to return it. Some of the devices have LCD screens and you can send messages to them saying, your service is up, please return it to the library. So there's different, depending on the device and some of the technical capabilities, you can either suspend it or tell the user, hey, now it's time to bring it back.
Yeah, that has been very effective for us at the Northwestern Regional Library System. If we suspend that service, that unit usually gets returned within a week, probably, or less. And then I can go in and get the service active again, and the next person can get a hold of it.
Great. Thanks, Christian. Jen F has a question about TechSoup. We are working with TechSoup. We'd love to partner with them, and we're making some progress there. But our service is actually the same rate plan that they offer. I've looked on that page. They've got 4G and 5G devices through a partner, and we offer similar devices and the same rate plan. So we'd be happy to talk to you, maybe save you some dollars on your plan if you are interested.
Angela has a great question. How do you handle overusage of data? And I know that that's an issue, especially if you've got a limited plan and you've got folks, doing a lot of like Netflix streaming or whatever. And I know that Mark can talk a little bit about your service plan, but I do want to just say, I think that one thing it's important to consider from the beginning with a hotspot program is whether you're going to specify in your policies and in writing, off the bat, whether there's any differentiation in the purpose of the hotspot use. And if you're going to make that distinction, of what the intended purpose of the device is, you're going to want to be really clear in your policies off the bat, because it can get tricky to say, well, maybe you're doing homework on YouTube, or maybe you're just having fun. And we want to encourage people to have access to everything, including the just having fun parts of the internet. But maybe, your funder doesn't feel that way. And so if that's something that you need to specify, I would encourage you to be really clear about it and try to do it right off the bat. Because dealing with those issues of, well, this hotspot's data is all used up because this person was on, Facebook for 40 hours. You want to have something written down already in place before you have to, deal with that situation. Mark, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, in our case, we have an unlimited rate plan, and we have some users, I hate to say this, that use a terabyte, maybe a couple that use 2 terabytes a month. So we have kind of a special rate plan that we have through T-Mobile. I think that's really important, though, to ask your carrier about the specifics of the plans. Again, if someone says, "Oh, I can do a $15 plan," you might want to know, is it lower quality video? Is it throttled? Is it lower priority? Those are all important things. Another one that I've heard from libraries is folks who check it out and then they go to Canada, they go to Mexico. Does it have international roaming on it or not? You might get left with a pretty big bill if you're not asking about that, or disabling that particular feature with your carrier. So just want to make a note. I've heard some libraries in New Hampshire that got stuck with some hefty bills.
You know what? I have never actually seen that before in a hotspot program that I've managed. And that is so fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's I would hate for anyone to run into that situation.
Okay, well, we've
Cool.
got just a couple minutes left before we hit the 45-minute mark here.
We are going to do another event around E-rate policy. You probably have been following, but there's a couple things going on in this world. There's a Supreme Court decision that should be coming out sometime this month around the entire Universal Service Program. We also have been following the E-rate hotspot rulemaking that was passed last year that Congress has now, the Senate has voted to eliminate it, and it's now before the House of Representatives. One thing to note there is that if the House follows through, the FCC could never do this again without congressional authority, literally an act of Congress. So we're following that and advocating that they don't do that, because the cost relative to the impact is high. But we're going to talk about all those topics. We're inviting some special guests to join us who are kind of experts in the policy space. So please RSVP if you haven't already. I'm going to try to grab the link if it'll let me. If not, someone can copy and paste that into the chat. But yeah, that's going to be on July 23rd next month. Again, we'll know a lot more about the state of play with E-rate by that point in time. And now on to the raffle, Liz.